Hi everybody, today's June 10, 2024, and I'm Dr. Randy Bach of the Newton Taxpayers Association. I am the president. I think I'm elected, maybe unelected, I can't tell. It could have been an insurrection, I have no idea. My memory doesn't go back that far. Fortunately, I have somebody here to help me with my memory and memories. I have the erudite, intelligent, and really insightful, deeply researching Dr. Stephen Gerzof, who's a friend of mine. He's an interesting man. He's a radiologist by training, but in his, I wouldn't even call it a retirement phase, but since he's been doing less of the radiology, he's been doing more of intellectual pursuits, and we're going to be the beneficiaries today. So without any ado, without any further ado, without any ado at all, we're going to have Dr. Gerzof join us, and we're talking today on the topic of I suppose indoctrination in the schools, maybe generally speaking, and as taxpayers, that is our enterprise principally. As Newton taxpayers, the majority, more than the majority of our funds go to the school system, and we should know what our product is. So, Steve, tell us a little bit about what has emanated from some of your, I hate to use the word peregrinations, but I love it, from your wanderings through the Newton school system of late.
Well, I'm a 50-year resident of Newton. Our kids and grandkids have all gone through the Newton schools. I'm not an expert on that, but some aspects of it caught my attention. About 2 years ago, my wife Gail and I brought the cattle car. There's a screenshot of that. It's a Holocaust education device. It's a replica of the cattle cars that brought Jews from their ghettos to the killing fields of eastern Poland, Russia, or to Auschwitz. And I went into it down in Florida as this teaching aid for high school students and college students, and was amazed at the level of education that it grabbed the students so much. What I wrote about it later was that the kids, nobody laughed, nobody cried, nobody texted, nobody tweeted, no one slept, no one slouched, and afterwards they all walked out as if they'd been to a funeral. They learned so much. They glommed together and saw the audio-visual projected on the inside. My wife said to me, we have to bring this to Newton. In my trying to bring it to Newton, I got an email from the former superintendent of schools, pro tem, that, and it's a quote that goes like this, after consultation with school leadership and heads of departments, we would prefer to have the cattle car at a neutral location. And I thought to myself, how do they themselves not see the school, Newton North, Newton South, as neutral? And so after a lot of discussion, it had to be at the Newton War Memorial. Some of the kids were bused from Newton South. Other kids from Newton North had to walk in the rain. That really bothered me. Anyway, come to find out it was available again, and I helped bring it back to Newton this past spring. And it was again at the Newton War Memorial. But the good news this time is we had Anna Nolan as our new superintendent of schools. If we can go to the next slide. This is the cattle car at the Newton War Memorial with Todd Cohen on your left. In the middle is the director of curriculum for the middle schools, and on the right in the red shirt is Anna Nolan, our new superintendent of schools. She went into the program inside the cattle car, came out, and immediately sent out an email to all 250 school districts in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that this is something they should get behind and should have on their campus as Holocaust education, because it comes with docents who explain before and after. It has relics from Auschwitz and is a wonderful educational aid for that age group.
Yeah, I was actually in the cattle car. You know, I heard a comedian the other day, just kind of zipping in the car, and he was talking about going to the Holocaust Museum, and he keeps, you know, his girlfriend asked him to go, and he keeps putting it off. He says he's not any kind of anti-Semitism. He just can't imagine, you know, the momentous grief of it. But I have to say, it's not like that per se. It's certainly a dose of horrible
reality.
of reality and nostalgia and sorrow. But you come out edified, and it's like, you have to have an awareness of what the world is. We have all kinds of sensors around us. You see a cat figuring out with the whiskers and whatnot what things you can go into and what not. Going into this cattle car, which is it's a small space, and I think maybe 20 people go in at a time or something like that. It's not even a fraction of the number of people who are kind of hoarded into it at the time during the 1940s.
No, you're right.
Sure, but it's still an incredible experience, and the multimedia is really touching. They follow kind of individual stories, and give it a personal touch. And I read the Diary of Anne Frank years ago, and it's an incredible piece of literature. This is on a par, in a sense, in more of a visual way, because you're actually experiencing. You're going in the cattle car, and this is actually, I think, probably her terminus as well. Our penultimate terminus, and you get the sense of what these cattle cars were like. Because I've read many stories, but you don't really have a sense of like the kind of the rough aspect of it. What it is to be in a cattle car, it's not comfortable. Nobody's expecting the cattle to get cushioned or anything like that, and to have I don't know 100 something odd people there, cheek to jowl, and somehow do bodily functions and whatnot, and just kind of deal with each other. People died en route. You can easily understand all that.
Yeah, but the way they've done it, intentionally written for teenagers, for high school and college kids, it's not scary. You see the light between the slats.
Yes.
You get the experience of what it was. But you just mentioned your position with the taxpayers, which brings me to understand money involved. I had funded this. It was free for them, and still they rejected it. But while we're on money, there is a huge amount of money that is going into buying the schools, it's as if there was kids for sale. This is money from Saudi Arabia, from Qatar, that has come and infiltrated the universities, from the universities down to the high schools.
I'd like to talk about that. I mean, there's an institution at Harvard. I remember, this is a while ago, but Rudy Giuliani was, I think, mayor of New York City, and there was going to be some type of grant. There was money for something, whatever, and free money. City government never turns that down. But they kind of pulled the threads of it. It was supposed to be something, I think, related to 9/11 memorial, and it was from some sheikdom, emirate, or whatever, and they were going to have, and they're like, no, 9/11, no, you guys were on the wrong side of that, helped perpetrate it, and we can't take that money. And Giuliani gave the money back. But at this simultaneously, I remember reading the same guy, I think you'll know his name better than I, gave money to Harvard, and that was never turned back, and it's turned into a center at Harvard. And what are the ramifications, kind of the ripple effect from that?
Well, it's called the Prince Al-Walid bin Talal Islamic Outreach Center. And as you would expect for Islamic outreach, they do Islamic outreach. One of the ways they do that, and I found this out by discussing this with a teacher about 15 years ago, was by offering free CEUs. Those are continuing education units, which teachers in Newton and statewide have to get to maintain their credentials as teachers. These free CEUs are given by the Outreach Center. I happened to be at a soccer game watching my grandson when one of the teachers watching her son sat down next to me and noticed I was reading a book that had some Arabic in it. She mentioned she'd been at this center, and I casually asked, about the CEUs. She explained it, and I asked then, how did they present Jews, Judaism, Israel, Palestine? And then all of a sudden, everything seemed to lock up. Her jaw clenched, her muscles tensed. She looked like I had almost insulted her when all of a sudden she closed her book, picked up her chair, and practically ran to the other side of the soccer field. I could only imagine that for the first time she was realizing that she may have been indoctrinated. But that CEU situation to the teachers leads me up to the cattle car. Why would they not want the cattle car, which was simply a piece of history?
Right. Well, I think this, as in the cattle car, you can kind of see the light between the slats. I mean, we have to kind of interpolate it and figure out what it is between, read between the lines here, and to think that this can't be presented because it's not, you have to present it on neutral ground. What is partisan about our schools? And I think our schools have been partisan for quite some time. I have to say, in many different aspects. My kids are men now, and so they were in the schools. They were born in the 1990s, so you figure I do the math. Anyway, they went through the entirety of Newton Public School, start to finish. And there were episodes that were overtly political back then. At times, George W. Bush was president, and in art class, the kids learned how to make, anti-George Bush posters. That was art, and this has been a big crossover. At the time, there was the institution of gay marriage was passed by the Supreme Court by Margaret Mitchell, not the author of Gone with the Wind, and the kids were asked to make an essay, and my son just said, he didn't talk about gay marriage. He just said, I'm not sure that the court system was the right way to do this. It should be, something that the people get to vote on, that kind of thing. That was his angle. He was only in middle school. And the teacher singled him out, made him stand up, and basically, kind of humiliated him in front of everybody, and announced for the first time to everybody in the class that she was, her sexual orientation differing from the norm, and how insulted she was by this. And he had no idea. He wept. It was kind of a struggle session, redolent of Maoism and whatnot. And our schools have this aspect of kind of dividing people. And I don't know how many people are aware of this, but I've talked with some teens in the schools and whatnot, and kids are kind of brought and separated based on their ancestry, and they have to kind of live out this kind of colonial oppressor-oppressed narrative based on their heritage. And we all come to this world pretty fresh. Obviously, neither of us are completely fresh anymore. But I'm just wondering, in your forays into the schools, what have you found out about curriculum going on now, and any types of these orientations?
Well, what you're talking about is critical race theory. And what I discovered, again by accident, about 15 years ago, 12 years ago, one of my nearby neighbors was having a book sale. She had just graduated from Newton South High School, and two of the books she was selling, I bought. One, if we can go to the next slide, The Modern Middle East by James Galvin. I look at it, in fact I read it, and I find out that James L. Galvin is the 2002-2003 Sheikh Zayed ibn Sultan Nahyan Visiting Professor of History at the American University of Beirut. And that explains to me why that book was biased. The other book she was selling was this one, the next slide, The Palestine-Israel Conflict, where on the cover you can see a photoshopped, nice-looking, I presume, Arab boy with a rock in his hand running away from what in the background is another photoshopped Israeli tank with its turret just happens to be pointing in his direction, sort of like a takeoff on the Chinese kid in Tiananmen Square, who was stopping the tanks.
And also the kind of inversion of David and Goliath.
Yeah, and I find if these are the books that they're using, you're going to find indoctrination in the kids. Just about this time, some of the parents in Newton, the other parents, I wasn't aware of it at the time, discovered this and tried to get a copy of the curriculum. The Newton School Committee and the teachers, the principals, refused to do that. After several years, the parents finally had to file a FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act, to actually get the teachers to divulge what they were teaching. And as it turned out, some of them were getting stuff off the internet, which was put out by Hamas and was terribly biased. It's really difficult to teach when the books themselves are problematic. Most recently, we had a situation in the library where there was an exhibit, and I won't go through that, but as a result of that, the librarians put up a poster of 24 books for more information. I analyzed those choice of books. I'm a bibliophile, and I found that the vast majority were either pro-Palestinian or some kind of peace studies which used that oppressor portion. One of them was this book, The 100 Years' War on Palestine by Rashid Khalidi. I'm familiar with him as a professor of...
Wasn't he like an early Obama guy? He was like in Chicago.
He may have been, but he's a professor at Columbia.
Sorry, no, it was Columbia. But there was a picture of Obama with Rashid Khalidi back in the day, and that they suppressed during the election. You know, Obama had issues in the 2008 election with Jeremiah Wright, who had Death to America, KKK, and also there were various, you know, he kind of coincided with the anti-Semitism and whatnot. And Rashid Khalidi was one of Obama's early advisors, but the pictures were like suppressed. It was a little bit like the Biden laptop. They were out there for people who really hunted and so forth, but they were kind of washed from, you know, the makings of social media at the time, 2008, but from the press and whatnot. You really didn't hear about it. All the pictures of him at these fundraisers with Rashid Khalidi were disappeared, as it were. Nowadays, I don't think it would be, because the Democrat kind of voting bloc has moved, you know, more towards the Arab point of view, demographics, you know, because to get Michigan and whatnot.
Well, people in Congress come from high schools and colleges. When I did a little more research on this, it was about the memoirs of his uncle, Dr. Hussein Fakhri Khalidi, who had been a mayor of Jerusalem and was the secretary of the AHC, the Arab Higher Committee in Jerusalem in 1947-48, when partition was being suggested by the UN. Interestingly, I found this line, whereas Khalidi talks about partition earlier in the book, he ends by saying the provision for an Arab state in the 1947 partition resolution, parenthesis, albeit never implemented, close parenthesis, and then it goes on. The albeit never implemented is mentioned by him, is written that way because he can't bring himself to write. The Arabs rejected the partition. If they had accepted it, there would have been an Arab state, a two-state solution, back in 1948 when Israel declared its independence because it accepted the partition. The day after Israel independence, 5 Arab armies entered Israel.
Right. So I kind of want to segue, go back to what we're talking about with the schools. And there was, like, I think at the public library going to be a Nakba exhibition.
Yes.
And so you're somewhat of an expert on this. And this Nakba is an interesting kind of formulation because, mind you, at the time there was, the country of Jordan got formed at the same time, simultaneously. There was, we have different kind of appellations for cis and trans these days, but there was Cisjordan and Transjordan. On this side of the Jordan River and on that side. So Transjordan is what we call Jordan. They got rid of the trans part. And the two-state solution was essentially that, in part, that this was going to be an Arab state, and the Cisjordan, that were going to be parts of it, at least, that were going to be an Israeli state. But, you know, the Nakba, as it were, is I think I forget what the Arab word, what it means. I think
catastrophe.
Catastrophe, there you go. So it's kind of like the Holocaust in a sense. It's termed that way. But it was, you know, there could have been, frankly, Lebanon is this multi-state solution, as it were. It was kind of cleaved from France, which had as a colony, and I'm not sure which year exactly, but Lebanon was essentially the same type of multi-ethnic state within a state. So I don't forget what the roles are. There's president, prime minister, and some other minister.
Different sects.
And each one has to be Druze, one has to be Christian, one has to be Muslim. And now they're kind of, anyway. So they did that for a certain number of years with some stability. And I'm not going to get to Lebanon because of the 1980s it kind of fell apart. But they still have that arrangement. So the template for having a kind of a multi-ethnic state or state within a state was there potentially, that Israel could have been that. And Israel itself does have that aspect. There's a few million Israelis who are Arab, non-Jewish, and Muslim for the most part, but some Christian, living within Israel with full rights, and they're members of their Congress, the Knesset, who are Arab and whatnot.
Clearly, yet students try, or now they try because they've gone to placard education, you just write it up there, they call it apartheid. And it is not, because the Israeli Arab Muslim citizens have as many rights as the Jews do. They serve on the Supreme Court, they're doctors, they're lawyers, and they're part of civil society.
So just as an asterisk to that, it's not completely that, because I don't think they are serving in the military. So
True.
That's a separate aspect to it. Now that may be a benefit, in part, and I think there is the option of volunteering, but they're not conscripted. And I do think that there are some Arabs within the
Druze community.
Yes, and
that
so
do
forth.
serve.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm going to leave that aside, but let's kind of circle back to another Newton thing. This is the Nakba exhibition. I'm not sure if you can tell us a little bit what happened there, what was going on.
Well, there was a protest. I had seen the exhibit beforehand and thought that it was sort of interesting, but I'm not a photographer, but I am an art buff, and it didn't seem like there was anything special that would require or at least meet the bar of making an interesting exhibition. And this was done by a committee at the library months before the October 7th attack. And it just didn't seem very special to me. But because there was the attempt to make the Nakba parallel or equivalent to the Holocaust, it was objected to. In the Holocaust, there were 44,000 collection centers where Jews were forced to, the larger ones being called ghettos, before they were transported to death camps. That was genocide. There is no one in Israel-Palestine that is rounding up Arabs for slaughter. It is not a genocide. But once you make that equivalent, it makes it sound like, well, one is just as bad as the other.
Right. So specifically, what was the Nakba? What happened there? If we take that word aside, what were the instructions given to the Arabs on the ground, and how many were there at the time versus Jews and so forth?
There were Arabs and Jews. The numbers can be argued about, but obviously the two communities were not getting along, as was the same thing happening in the Indian subcontinent. There was India, Hindus and Muslims. Muslims have one god, Hindus have many gods, and there was communal strife. The UN, after it was invented after World War II, decided on partition. There was also ethnic cleansing of Germans in the Sudetenland that Hitler had forced in. They had to move back. Partition seemed to be the best of poor solutions, and Pakistan was created. That was on August 15th of 1947. It worked insofar as there was a separation in two countries, but there were between
three, sort of.
Well, forget
East Pakistan.
That was later. But in that process, there were between 15 and 20 million deaths between Hindus and Muslims.
Say that number again.
Between 15 and 20 million Hindus and Muslims killed in the separation, creating Pakistan. Now, they have a border, a wall. It is just as heavily guarded as the Israeli-Gaza border. There are incursions. There have been 3 wars between them. In a book called Clash of Civilizations by Samuel P. Huntington, he observes that many Muslim countries have difficulty living peaceably, I'm quoting him, peaceably with their neighbors.
With non-Muslim neighbors? Well, frankly, with Muslim neighbors as well.
That too.
And there's the Iran-Iraq War claimed, I'm not sure how many million soldiers alone.
But that was also sectarian in a way. That was between the Shia
And the
Iranians and the Sunni Muslims of Iraq. But they don't necessarily make a distinction that way. They can get together, you know, my brother and my brother against my cousin, me. In other words, everyone against everyone else. And that's the way Gaza turned out to be against
But specifically
Israel.
just to kind of get this one historical point, what were the instructions on the ground during this episode, 1948, that later has become this Nakba?
Well, this uncle, Fakhri Khalidi, the secretary of the Arab Higher Committee, issued an order that the Arabs living in the areas that were to become Jewish should leave immediately. They should evacuate because the Arab armies, those 5 Arab armies that came in the day after, that invaded the day after Israeli independence, were going to kill the Jews. They would wipe them out, and then the Arabs could come back and take their possessions. It was like a typical jihad, except it didn't happen that way. The Arabs, however, after several communal incidents, one of them at a small village called Deir Yassin, after a battle, some called a massacre, became a focal point for their leaving. It turns out that Rashid Khalidi's uncle, on hearing the news, told his voice over Palestine broadcast, the Palestine broadcasting system, to say that there were atrocities. There were pregnant women that were raped. Their bellies were slit open. There were atrocities. And when this is told to an honor-shame culture where the honor resides in the chastity of their women, they very fearfully immediately started to evacuate voluntarily on the orders of the Arab Higher Committee and with the false information that there had been atrocities. The result of that also resonated with the King of Jordan, who prior to that was trying to mollify things and almost side with the Israelis to avoid a war. He now found that he had to side with his Arab neighbors or he would be assassinated, which ultimately happened because of this lie about Deir Yassin. So this is bringing around, when you make up the lies, bad lies make for bad history, makes for bad opinions, and that creates bad policy.
Right, so we only have a few minutes left, 4 minutes exactly. I'd like you to kind of touch on what's happening in the schools. What are we getting? What's the narrative that's being taught there? I'm going to just preface slightly. I ran in the streets of Nonantum, an old friend of mine who's a local, and he, he's kind of the opposite of anti-Semitic. He's philo-Semitic. He very much appreciates, that piece of town. Had an Italian fraction, a Jewish fraction, others as well. But people, I'm not saying that everything's always, wonderful and kumbaya, but they get along. They have kind of respect for each other, and he understood and knew the stories of the Holocaust, and he was fascinated by them. Being a better victim, a bigger victim, shouldn't be points per se, but there's at least the sympathy for what it means and what the need for, for State of Israel, for instance. What are the narratives and stories that people are getting now, and how it's being transmitted in the schools? And is the battle already kind of lost and determined by the money part? And maybe you can just kind of elaborate on that as well.
It's a great question, and one that I don't think anyone has the answer to, certainly not me. Now, please understand, I have great sympathy for the teachers. We have great teachers, but they themselves have been indoctrinated into a bad ideology. I think there are great hopes for Anna Nolan coming to become superintendent of schools, certainly by her actions regarding the cattle car. But one of the problems that I saw with our librarians even is that the books they chose were like this, which are like 250 pages, yet Israeli history books are 1,500 pages. The problem is the Palestinian narrative is easy to understand. It's all emotive, it's feelings. Israeli history is like Western history. It comes from our Thucydides and Herodotus tradition. A follows B follows C. It's logical and progressive. That's not necessarily the case in Islam. And so as far as what our teachers are teaching now, that remains to be seen. I have great hopes for Anna Nolan. She has her finger on the pulse. And in the middle of the picture with the cattle car was the chairman of the curriculum development for Newton schools, for the middle schools. Yeah. And I think her relationship with him is going to have impact starting when kids first come into middle schools and then go to high school.
Now, for resources, we just have maybe a minute left. You're a bright guy. We can't expect everyone to quite have your brilliance. But where do you recommend people go, or how can they follow some of your thoughts and ideas? And how do you recommend people kind of educate themselves reasonably and equitably?
Try to read both sides of the issue. You can't just, I watch some of the local news, and I cringe when I hear the way it is presented, where there is inherent bias. I see it now because I've taken courses in the analytics of it. But for the average person, finding some good websites, Palestine Media Watch, for example, Middle East Forum, CAMERA, C-A-M-E-R-A, Committee for Middle East Reporting in America.
CAMERA.org.
It could be CAMERA. Their main office is right here in Newton.
Fair enough. I just have, we can wrap it up. I just want to mention one thing, which is the hostages were released, not released, they were rescued. And the stories, the way they're told, is that it was that somehow this was an atrocity against the Palestinians per se, which is kind of the way things are posed interestingly amongst our unbiased press. And somebody made a meme showing the guy Liam Neeson when his daughter was taken, how many people wound up being killed in that his own raid. Anyway, I leave that as food for thought. Thank you for coming on. Appreciate it. If people want to follow us, they can find us at Newton Taxpayers Association on Facebook and leave us a message. Thank you so much.